just like this all over the place, mostly in the southeast. My role in the project is coming more from the land use planning, design perspective. I'm also helping with some of the mapping related to that. So.
I'm Randy Gross. I'm an economic and strategic planning consultant, and I'll talk a little bit more about my role in a few minutes, but I've worked with these guys quite a few times, so happy to be here today.
I'm Vince Malvasi with Neil Schaefer. Our role is going to be basically the transportation side of things and also civil engineering, whether it be water, sewer, utility.
All right, thank you. And just so we get a better sense of who all's here now, of course, I know the mayor's here. Are there other aldermen here? Okay.
I'm Doc Harris. I'm over the large here in Hernando.
Great. Thank you for being here. What about planning commission members? Okay. 3 of those.
Robin Gunn.
Okay.
Shakespeare.
Natalie Lynch.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. And also, were there some Chamber of Commerce board folks here?
Sydney.
Okay. Super. Well, thanks for being here. And so here's basically what we're going to do tonight. We're going to just kind of go over the project, kind of the big picture, what it's all about, introduce you to the project. We're going to each talk about just some initial findings, things that, this is our first day officially on the ground. I've been here several times. Well, I guess we've all been here in other contexts, but as far as, since we've been hired for this project, these are just kind of some of our initial findings, which a lot of the stuff you'll probably know yourselves. Then we're going to spend quite a bit of the time really answering 2 questions. And this is where, audience participation comes in. First of all, we're going to have you tell us what you think are Hernando's challenges and opportunities for the future within the context of a plan. And then secondly, we're going to identify model communities. And when I say model communities, I'm not saying, oh, we want to replicate town A, or, what I really mean is we've all either lived in other places, traveled, whatever, and there may be some aspect of a particular town or a bunch of towns that you think, maybe that's a concept we could adapt to Hernando. So that's really what that question is going to be about. And then after we have that discussion, we'll just tell you kind of what the next steps are in the project. So anyway, with that, I'm going to give you a bit of a project overview. So a comprehensive plan, and this is something you've already got, by the way. This isn't your first, not your first rodeo, or in this case, comprehensive plan, because you've got one that was prepared in 2007 was your last one, but it's really your kind of game plan or blueprint on how the community is going to grow and develop in the future. And the reason it's called a comprehensive plan is because it's comprehensive in nature. It addresses all sorts of issues: land use, development, transportation, housing, economics, all natural environment, all those kind of issues, recreation. But any good comprehensive plan should be able to answer 4 fundamental questions. Number 1, where are we now? And that's kind of our research. When Randy looks at the economy, what is the economy kind of comprised of? We'll be looking at fiscal planning issues and transportation. So that's kind of the initial research. Where are we headed? That's what are your trends? And what kind of population growth are you experiencing and so forth? Number 3, where do you want to go? And that's where the community really comes in, because this isn't our plan. We're just technical people who are a vehicle to get you where you want to go. So we're going to be asking you, what you want to see in the future. And I'll talk about the process where we'll have all sorts of things in the future to do that involve the community in a hands-on way to kind of convey their hopes for the future of Hernando. And then 4th, how do you get there? And that's a real technical part. Like, once we know here's the vision you have for your community, and we put together the details on how to implement that. So that's kind of in general. So why would you want to do a comprehensive plan? And there's actually a lot of reasons, but here's probably the top 5, at least in my mind. Number 1, to build consensus so that everybody's on the same page. If you don't have a plan to go by, what your community will be in 10 or 20 years is simply a composite of a bunch of decisions that individual developers make, right? Instead of having a game plan, it's just a series of development decisions. So you want to be in the driver's seat, right? Not just reacting to development proposals that may not fit a plan. So build consensus. Number 2, the basis for zoning, and that's something, as in most states, Mississippi requires that your zoning be tied to your comprehensive plan. And that's one of the things that will probably be the next step after the plan, is that to implement the plan, there may be new zoning classifications or changes that occur, or on the zoning map, changes. So that's another thing. This is going to be the basis for your zoning. Number 3, securing funding for projects. Now I know, like every other community, you guys pursue grants, and if you've got a project and you're pursuing grant money from some state or whoever, and that project fits into a broader plan, it makes you that much more competitive against other communities that are going after those same dollars. So that's another reason. Enhancing the quality of life. Well, I guess the first thing is that that's something that your citizens are worthy of having their quality of life enhanced, but also for business recruitment. When businesses make decisions on where to locate, nowadays more than maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago, they really do look at quality of life. Do you have greenways? Do you have bike lanes? Do you have a vibrant downtown? Do you have recreational facilities? Those sorts of things. So there's, beyond just keeping your citizens happy, there are economic development reasons as well. And then finally, for fiscal efficiency, so that you can, when you make decisions on how public funds are spent, it can be done in a strategic way that ties back to a plan, so you're leveraging the most out of limited taxpayer dollars. So anyway, those are just some of the reasons why you would do a comprehensive plan. So this is a 5-step project. The first one, task 1, which we're part of now, is the project kickoff and research. And we did, we all did various amounts of research on our different topics before this trip, and we'll do more afterwards. The next thing is that it's kind of 2-part. The visioning part, Keith and I are going to be back. We got to pick a date, but hopefully not too far down the road. And we're going to have a series of interviews with small groups and stakeholder meetings, and we'll walk through a series of questions and get input that way. Also, Randy's going to be doing his economic assessment, and in addition to a general assessment of the economy, he's actually going to do a retail market analysis. And what the market analysis does is it figures what's the potential for future retail. And when we say retail, we're also talking about dining and I guess some personal services, things like that. And he'll talk about that a little later. But and not just understanding what the potential is in the future, so you can plan accordingly, but also strategic recommendations on how you make that happen, so that you can grow your retail development and corresponding tax revenue. And then after we do that stuff, that's all kind of the main background research. Task 3 is the charrette and concept plan. And most of you are probably familiar with the term charrette, but I like to describe it as a multi-day intensive brainstorming session to develop ideas that serve as a basis of a plan. And in this particular case, we're going to be here for 4 days. And on the first evening of that 4-day charrette, we'll have a public workshop. And we'll still talk with Keith and other people on how we structure it, but typically we present our findings, so you're kind of educating people on what the reality is for the community. Then we break people up into teams, just teams of volunteers. Each team of community representatives are sitting at a table and have a big base map and a bunch of colored markers, and we kind of walk them through a planning process. And I always describe it as deputizing the public to be planners for one evening. And everybody comes up with their plan within a limited amount of time, maybe an hour or so. And then at the end of that evening, each team of maybe 5 to 10 people presents their key ideas. And that first evening is a springboard for us to spend the next 3 days to come up with a concept plan. And on that final night, the 4th night, we will present the concept plan. And the concept plan is the main ideas that will then be expanded on and fine-tuned the actual plan document. So that, which is task 4, that's kind of the boring part, where it's just us rolling up our sleeves, putting the plan document together. Then we would get it to the city. I guess Keith would probably review it initially and edit it, and then we get it out there for the public to see, and then we would present it. And anytime we meet with the public, we present our ideas. We have lots of time for questions, and so that we can make adjustments as it goes along. So it's kind of baby steps and kind of incremental. And then, I guess that took us through task 5. So that's the process overall. And by the way, before we get into our discussion on the 2 big questions, we'll open it up to I'm sure you may have questions about the process and otherwise. My last slide, I want to just mention, I think it's important to understand the history of the community. And so, and you've got a fascinating history. I mean, it goes back, if you want to start back in the Mississippian era, when the Plaquemine culture was here, they were mound builders, and they were here from 1200s to 1600s. They actually evolved into the Chickasaws in the Urals area. But in 1541, of course, DeSoto came through the area, and the county is named after it, your community is named after them. Then in 1836, that was a big year when the town was really officially created. It was, as you probably know, it was called Jefferson originally. And then they realized, whoops, there's some other post offices called Jefferson, so let's change it. That's when it became Hernando. And so that was kind of the beginning here. Of course, you were the county seat. The railroad arrived in 1856. Civil War occurred here, and of course, your courthouse at the time was burned down. The Union Army occupied. They burned a lot of buildings. That courthouse that burned during the Civil War wasn't replaced until 1872. One thing that's not up here, but I've already written it up in the background thing, as I look out and see all the maps, you know what happened in 1878 here? The yellow fever epidemic wiped out like 40% of the population. I mean, we think what we're going through now is getting back to 40% of the population of Hernando. So that was a huge thing, 1878. And then I got these dates where like modern conveniences arrived. Like electricity got here in 1916. Water, public water was after that. Sewer in 1932. So those early 1900s were important as far as advancing, those utilities. In 1940, the courthouse pictured here burned down. And in 1942, the one we have now is built. And then I guess another big year, 1964 is when I-55 was constructed. So those are just, I go into more detail in the actual plan document, but if you had to look at sort of the timeline, those are some key dates. And with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Keith.
Thank you, Bill. Do you have something I can spray this down with?
I'm sorry? Oh, you know what we're going to do? We were going to hit that one line.
Yeah, go ahead. And actually, this will be the perfect time.
Yeah, because now we're getting
some of these maps are a little difficult to read, especially at this scale. But it's great to be here. This is, I believe, only my second time in Hernando, and the last time was like 1999, I believe, when I was working for a firm that was based in Memphis, and we were doing some work in the area. So for me, this is a lot about kind of getting to know this place and this community a bit better. What we started with, though, before we got here is we've been collecting all this data. Keith has provided us with GIS data that allows us to illustrate, to the extent that that data is available, some of the characteristics of this community, both physical characteristics as well as policy and zoning and things like that. So we've been starting to put together maps, and we have others to do. Keith and I were actually this afternoon working with the county to try to get some additional data, but we're making some progress. So I'm just going to kind of hit on a few things. Now, again, these are things that are probably very evident to you because you live here, you work here, you play here. But for me, these are things that I was seeing from maps. And now that I've been here, and we did a great tour today, even my mind is changing a little bit on some of these things. But from a topographic standpoint, you guys know you're kind of the eastern edge of the Delta region. I believe you're, from a heritage area standpoint, you land in both the Mississippi Hills and the Mississippi Delta. So from that standpoint, that has a lot to do with your topographic conditions. You've kind of got a role in certain areas. You've got some really steeper topography where you've got these creeks and water bodies that are coming through, but the heart of your downtown is relatively flat and has some gentle slopes and things like that. And so that certainly is going to present opportunities and in some extent challenges as you think about the future and future development. There are several creeks, and I'm going to go to this next slide, but there are several creeks that are actually starting to form the area where Hernando has grown. And that is kind of evidenced by here. So obviously we've got the Arcabutla Lake here, And then we've got Hurricane Creek, which kind of wraps up to the north, goes above 267 and kind of runs along that. We've got Hurricane Creek here, Massacuda, I guess is how, or Massacuda Creek is how you say that. You've got a portion of Coldwater River, even though that's not really in the in your city limits. It is within a portion of it's within where your future land use plan extends. And so it's important to know and understand these things. As you can imagine, the floodplain that you experience, the flood hazard areas, are really associated with those creeks and streams and other tributaries. But they're not, quite as bad in certain areas where you think maybe they would be, like in this area here, just east of 55 and north of 267. But there are obviously, sorry?
269?
269, what did I say, 267?
Yeah, come on, man.
Am I not allowed to make one number mistake? Oh my gosh. This guy, he's tough on you. He's tough on you. 269, right? Okay, thank you. And then, of course, there are, as you can imagine, and as you see, there's some wetland areas, but they're mostly associated with the tributaries and so forth. There are less in this area, although there are some farm ponds, some freshwater ponds, excuse me, and a few little spotty areas in there, but not a ton. Now, one of the things, and this is one of the reasons why we were at the county today, is we were wanting to try to get better land use data. We're trying to create kind of a snapshot of what the current land uses are in the community. So we're trying to work with the county to tie that data together. But one of the things that we were able to do with the data that we have now is to kind of look at underdeveloped areas versus developed areas. And it was a very kind of simple query that we did. So there's an asterisk by it because, I think as we get more information, we'll learn more. But if you can see this map, I mean, obviously your boundary is what is sort of this darker line and the shaded gray. But these sort of dark turquoise on this wall are areas that are showing up as underdeveloped or vacant right now. Now, some of this may not be quite accurate because the land roll is usually a little bit behind what's actually happening and what's being improved, but there's still quite a bit of land. And when you look at that compared to the acreage of what's within the city boundary now, there's a good amount of land that is underdeveloped or undeveloped. Now, obviously, some of that has to do with the creeks and the tributaries, some of the floodplain that probably, would never be developed. So it's not as if you've got, 55% of your land you can go and develop, but there is a significant amount. And I would say in this area, north of 269, again, there's some down here. Obviously, we know about Hernando West, which is proposed for development, although that, obviously is a little bit slower to start. But there is a lot of opportunity in this area. And I believe that's it. I'm going to turn it over to Vince to talk about some of the transportation mobility.
Good evening, everyone. As a Hernandonian, I can certainly appreciate some of the things we've been talking about here and we're excited about, the possibility of moving forward with the comp plan and getting everybody on the same page, the same vision here. But as we look at transportation, I want you can't really begin by talking about transportation without understanding that there is an umbrella of regional planning called the MPO in this area. MPO covers the urbanized area from DeSoto County, all of DeSoto County, part of Marshall County, and then a couple of counties in Tennessee. But that basically, they do a regional plan for transportation, which we, as a jurisdictional part of that, the city of Hernando, along with the other cities in DeSoto County, benefit from that greatly. And so we're going to obviously be using that as one source of, as a resource for developing our plan and looking into how we can tie into things they've already developed. But there are a couple of projects I'm going to mention that Hernando does have ongoing right now, based on the MPO, LPA projects, and that is the Linear Park that's ongoing now, also the McInville realignment to tie into the interchanges there at I-269. Those two projects were developed through MPO and through our local government agency. So they are a big part of the plan, and we're utilizing some of their information. They have a great public participation program. Like some of you may have been to some of their meetings, but they actually kind of have a handbook on public participation. So they do a great job of that and getting out to the public and understanding what the issues are. So look forward to using some of that information. But as you well know, if I would probably take a survey of anybody in Hernando, the first thing they would say as far as traffic issue would be our commerce area, Commerce Street. And that is one of our main east-west corridors along. We've now got 269. And so those two corridors along with I-55 and 51 back up the north-south corridors, the main corridors of town. We will be looking at that particular area. That is, we were talking about that this morning, how that area east of the railroad track is basically our gateway to the city. And so, we're going to look at that and make sure that that's covered as far as how we want to develop that. That's going to be obviously a lot of research will have to go into that as far as determining how to do that. But obviously, to retrofit something like that, especially that area, would be a major task. But that's something that will be addressed, and we'll take a look at that. There are other projects down the road I want to mention that I know some are long term, like I-55 over Commerce. They're talking about widening that bridge. That's in a long range plan. And speaking with MDOT, they say that that's actually behind the plan to get I-55 widened from Church down to from Church to Star Landing, and then Star Landing to Commerce. So that's a little ways down the road, but it's something that we need to consider in the long range plan. And then, as we develop, we talked about a couple of major developments here. Looking at development contracts, that is something that we can use to help provide some continuity in how we develop different areas as far as someone moving in. For example, the access management slide we have there, you can see there right there on I-50 on 51, where you have, I think that is right there at the funeral home in the deal. As you well know, there's parking spaces on either side, right at the traffic's edge. Things like that, you can address in the combination with development contract and your asset management program. You can kind of help resolve some of those issues and not let that happen. But there's one of the main things is like your corner convenience store moves in. They want access on both sides of the corner, to access on both sides. That happens all the time. So with an access management program, you can avoid that, and they know up front what they have to do. So we'll be looking into that program and trying to get that kind of instilled in our traffic plan. Existing road types. As you can see, I mentioned the I-269 corridor along with Commerce Street, east-west. I don't have my pointer, but
We got one up there.
Byhalia Road.
Yeah, it should be up there. There you go.
And this is Byhalia here. Those are, and then you got 2-lane road here. And then I guess down here would be Holly Springs and Oak Road to the south. Those are kind of identified on what we call a functional classification map. And that, anything that uses federal funds, especially from MPO, would have to be on that classification map. And so those are candidates for, getting funding through MPO down the road. So once we define, kind of the different types of roadways that we're going to be addressing, and of course we'll have some, prepared templates for those as well as cross section to include, if we can, in certain areas, a complete street, which will include bike ped, which could be separate, outside the street or inside the street. But depending on the area, the flow, and the amount of traffic you have on the roadways, we'll develop those cross sections so that, you know, once you get into those areas, you'll know kind of what template to use. Keep everything consistent. And like I said, you know, if you look at Commerce right here, looking at the traffic counts, you'll see that West Commerce has 4,000. That's out here on the west side. So if you look over here, we've got 16,000. So you can see that there's obviously, that's why they go to that location. There's major problems there. I think access, one thing. But there's also going to be a problem, like I said, with right of way in there. So we're going to have to look at that pretty close. And if comparing that, if you go to Goodman Road, their count is like 30,000, 35,000. So I mean, you're carrying a lot of traffic right there in that geometry, that cross section. Just if you look compare it to 51, that's, you know, they've got 8,000, 82. I-269 now presently has 12,000. So there are some, you know, we'll be using this data to help us develop traffic plans for these different areas. And then just to touch on utilities, this is a map that came from the Public Service Commission. And basically it shows the certificated areas that surround Hernando. There's basically Nesbitt on the north, and then you've got North Mississippi Utility, which the city just recently purchased. And then the city of Hernando here, and then Belmont is on top of it. So the kind of the thing you see here is that, you know, a lot of times we know how these were developed. Obviously, rural utility systems were developed, and then the city comes in and these maintain their certificated areas. And so there's usually a conflict sometimes between what the service are providing in those certificated areas surrounding the city versus what the city's doing. And so that's something we need to look at closely to see if there's any discrepancies like that. And also fire rating, you know, you want to make sure that your fire rating is good for insurance purposes. And when they do fire rating, they're pretty much, they're going to include this entire area, not just what the city does here. So that's something we'll look at. And then the other areas I've shown, everything else as far as sewer, these are just for water. You know, everything is sewers back in the city. So that's what all these green lines are, back in sewer lines. And then all of that ends up going to the crew, which is regional utility authority, picked up by pump station north, pump station south, and goes out to short for the treatment plant. So the main thing about your water and sewer is we want to know what we have there and basically map it if we can, model it if we can, so that when the development does move in, you can plug it into your system and say, yes, we have capacity for that development. So with that, Randy, I'll let you do it.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you tonight. Thanks for coming out, despite everything that's going on in the world. I'm going to be working on a lot of the economic components of the plan. And whenever I work on a comprehensive plan, sometimes I start with a lot of flexibility because the economic and fiscal types of questions kind of evolve. And I need to know really from you in the beginning of what the key issues are, and that way I can refine my scope to really target the key questions that the city has. But as far as the things that I'll be focusing on, I'll be looking at existing economic conditions, which is what I'm working on right now, to really understand what your existing economic base is, what the key issues are or opportunities are currently, and some of the trends. And then I'll be focusing, as Phil said, on a retail market analysis. I know that the city had some questions about retail. It's in particular because you wanted to look at your tax base. I think you'd want to reduce some of the leakage. I know that people who live here are commuting up into Memphis or further north and are shopping elsewhere and spending their money elsewhere. And so there's a need to reduce some of that leakage, but also to provide amenity value for the people that are moving here, and restaurants and dining and entertainment and shopping opportunities for people that are moving here as well. But ultimately it comes down to tax base as a key component of that question. So the retail market analysis, as Phil said, will help answer what is the future potential for retail, and we can focus that question in terms of the amount of retail, where it could be located, how to recruit it, how to develop it in a way that really gets you what you want to have. And then finally, I'll have some strategic planning and visioning for economic development. It's not a full economic development strategy, but it does look at some of the key questions in economic development and sort of focus on some of those economic and community development. So that's what I'm looking at now, but as I said, it might refine a little bit as I hear from you and hear what some of the key issues are, and I can kind of pivot a little bit to look at some of those key issues. Just some initial findings from some of the very baseline analysis that we've done so far. Just in terms of demographics, and I don't think any of this will surprise you too much, but the city's been growing at the rate of about 1.5% per year in population since 2010. You're estimated to have about 16,400 in population now. The household base has also been increasing about 2.4% per year, and that's a good sign because the households are the basic unit for retail expenditures. So knowing that you have a growing, rapidly growing household base is supportive of that. You also have increasing income, which also feeds into your retail market, and growing at about 1% per year above the rate of inflation. So that's also a positive thing. And as you probably know, this county, DeSoto County, has the highest per capita income in the state of Mississippi. So you're already above the U.S. median household income, and you're starting from that point. So you're a fairly affluent community, even on a national basis. And then you have some shifting demographics. You have a growing Hispanic population. Your median age is falling, so you have some younger families, for example, moving in, and your median age is going down. Even with the baby boomers moving up in age, I'm one of those, so I know that we're all kind of moving up. And baby boomers, frankly, have been driving the housing market for 50 or 60 years and continue to drive the housing market. But with younger families moving in, you kind of have ameliorated some of the impacts of the baby boomers a little bit with that. So you have a more diverse population base. Also, your elderly population is growing, and often in the US, the fastest growing population base are the people over 80 years old, over 85 years old, and that's growing. It was about 3.7% of your population in 2010, and now it's 4.5% of your population. So keeping that in mind is very important in terms of the level of services you provide and where you're going in the future. In terms of your economic base, your local Hernando economic base, you have about 9,300 jobs within the city limits. Now you're the county seat, so you have a lot of government jobs. You also have the public schools that are based here. And when the census looks at jobs, they're looking at where those jobs are based or headquartered. And so as you look at this chart here, there's this huge purple area here in terms of what kind of jobs you have. That's education jobs, or 41% of the jobs in the city. But the reason why there's so many listed here is because since the Board of Education is based in the city limits, all of those teachers and educators throughout the county are counted as Hernando jobs, even though they're not necessarily working in the city of Hernando. So I believe the way the Census Bureau has counted that is you probably, all those 41% of your jobs are not actually in Hernando, but they're based here. You also have a lot of retail jobs. About 11% of your jobs are retail, and 8% are in accommodation and food service, so hotels and food service. So you have a service-based economy. Before COVID, before March, your fastest growing growth sectors were, in addition to education, were administrative services, accommodations, retail, and healthcare. Also, you had several declining sectors, including manufacturing. You're losing about 50 jobs per year in manufacturing since 2010. So that's something we have to keep our eye on, because we want to have a diversified economy, because that also buffers you from economic downturns. residents. Also, construction jobs, for some reason, were declining by about 40 per year, which is surprising to me, given that you have so much housing construction, et cetera. In terms of your role in the county as a whole, the county has about 65,000 jobs. So Hernando's about 14.5%, 15% of the county's employment base. For education jobs, because you have all the schools headquartered here, you're almost 90% of the education jobs in the county. But again, the teachers and all of that are counted as Hernando jobs. Management services, you have about almost a quarter of all the county's management services jobs. Transportation, though, less than 2%. So you see a big difference in terms of the types of jobs that you have compared to the county as a whole. Memphis, the Memphis metropolitan statistical area, of which you're a part, has about 616,000 jobs. Hernando has 1.5% of the job base in the metropolitan region. Again, you have a lot of education jobs and government jobs because you're the county seat, but construction, only 1.5%, retail, only 1.5%. So you have a relatively small share of the Memphis regional economy. And this is important for a reason I'll tell you in a minute, but obviously you have a lot of commutation out of the city. Just looking, this is no surprise to any of you, but the unemployment rate was starting to go up actually, and then COVID hit and it's really peaked, but has started to go down again. In March, it was 3.8% in DeSoto County, and in 1 month, it went up to 11.9%. That's the sharpest increase I've seen in my lifetime in 1 month. In terms of where you work, the residents of the county, not the jobs that are in the county, or in the city, but the residents of Hernando and where you work. There are about 6,900 of you employed, the residents. 14% work in healthcare, 11% retail, 11% transportation, another 11% education. So those are the top, and accommodation. So those are the top fields of occupations in which you're employed as residents. About 86% of the working residents of Hernando, 86% of the jobs in Hernando are filled by people commuting in to Hernando. And 81% of the residents who are working are commuting out of Hernando. So like a lot of suburban communities where we work, you have a lot of people coming into work and a lot of people moving out to work. They're not necessarily the same people. Only about 19% of your residents are the people actually working here. So ideally, from a planning perspective, from an economic development perspective, from a tax-based perspective, you'd like to have more people who live in Hernando working in Hernando. Then you're not spending as much money commuting somewhere else, driving somewhere else to work and to shop and doing all of those kinds of things. Just to give you an idea of the mismatch, this chart it's a little complex, but it's trying to show the ratio of jobs to residents in different sectors of your economy. So for example, in retail, 140% of your, you have 140% of your retail jobs compared to residents in the city of Hernando. 130% of administrative jobs to residents. But when it comes to something like financial services, only 70% are filled, not filled by residents, but you have 70% of the number of jobs in the city are in financial services compared to the number that are residents working in financial services. Does that make any sense, or do I need to explain that again?
Explain that, please.
Okay, so if you took the number of people working in financial services in the city of Hernando, it's only 70% of the number of residents from Hernando working in that sector. Does that make sense? So you're not even providing enough jobs in financial services. If every single resident of Hernando who works in a bank were employed in Hernando, only 70% of them would be employed here, even if every single one of them were working in Hernando. But for retail, you have a lot more retail jobs than you have residents who work in retail. Is that clearer? Okay. And so we want, ideally, you want to have 100 across the board here. You have 100%. So the ideal number would go across here. You see how many of the sectors fall below that? And all those sectors that fall below are people commuting, you have a lot of people commuting out because those jobs just aren't here. This just summarizes your commutation patterns, which feeds into a lot of what you're doing, transportation. Here your residents are commuting out, primarily going north into Memphis, north into South Haven, and these areas, Olive Branch. The workers that are coming here are coming in from all directions, from the north, from the east, from the south. You see a lot of people driving up 55 from the south to work here. So it's a different pattern of commutation, depending on whether you live here or work here. Just a quick summary of the real estate market, and this will be filled in a lot more because I'll be conducting some interviews with brokers and collecting a little bit more information. But in terms of office space, you're part of the DeSoto County submarket for office. You're close to the airport. Now, the airport is a big driver for office and industrial uses, as you know. So being close to the airport is a good thing in terms of office development and industrial development. A lot of the county's office market is located along Goodman and 51 corridor. Rents generally between $15, $16 a square foot. Hernando's rents from the listings that I saw. Now this is not a comprehensive set, but a sample of listings that I looked at in terms of office space, the rents are about 10 to 20% higher than the county average for office space. That might be due to a lack of office space to meet the demand that might be here, or it might just be the affluence of the area, other factors that are feeding into that, the types of office space. Obviously, the courthouse has an impact because you have a lot of lawyers and other people who work in the courts who are downtown and have their offices here. But a lot of them own their space, I believe, rather than renting it. But still, that has an impact on the office market. Industrial space, again, the DeSoto County is its own submarket of the Memphis region, and there are almost 60 million square feet of industrial space in DeSoto County alone. Vacancy is relatively low at 5.4% compared to the regional average of 6.5%, and rents are about $3.60 to $7 a square foot on average. And again, being close to the airport, the world's largest distribution airport, I don't know if you all knew that, but it is the world's largest. That's a big deal when it comes to industrial space. In terms of retail, you're considered the outlying DeSoto submarket if you're even considered part of the retail market in the Memphis region. But you're very much on the fringe, on the outskirts of the retail market. Rents between about $16 to $17 a square foot. I could only find 6 listings in CoStar, which is one of the main listing services for commercial industrial uses for retail space. And there was a broad range of spaces that were listed that were built in 1940, some of it just built a couple of years ago. So a broad range of space there. You have a significant amount of retail competition, as you know. So when we talk about the retail market, which I'll be going into greater detail with as part of my work, you're at the fringe of the market base. So the people your natural trade area for retail would be the people commuting up here towards Memphis from the south. That's your natural retail base, not the people in Shelby County coming down here. That would not be the natural base for retail. So when you think about what's south of you, it's fairly rural, farmland, some small towns. So your retail base starting out is fairly small. So the housing that's coming in here will help build up your retail base, the incomes that are here, but creating a destination will be very important, as we've discussed earlier. Creating a destination here is important for getting the retail dollars spent here. This is just a summary of some of the office space in the DeSoto submarket. 72% of it is in South Haven. No big surprise there. About 14% of the office submarket in the county is in Hernando. Let's see. On the housing side, you're part of the DeSoto County submarket. Again, you're close to the airport, so that impacts on the housing market. About 40% of your units were built in the 10-year period between 2000 and 2009. So a significant amount of your housing was built in one 10-year period. 82% of your housing is single-family detached units. We did see some townhouses today, a little bit of apartments and other multifamily, but almost all of your housing is in single-family detached units. 81% or so is owner-occupied. The median value in 2018 was about $190,000, according to the Census Bureau. But a lot of the houses fall in that $150,000 to $300,000 range. About 18% of your homeowners pay more than 35% of their income in mortgage payments. So that's not too bad. About 1 in 5 are paying more than a third of their income for housing. The third, that's a threshold. If you're paying more than 35% of your income in housing, that means you're probably paying too much for your housing, or you don't have the incomes to support the housing that you own. It's different on the renter side. The vacancies are low. The median rent is fairly high at over $1,000 per month, and nearly 50% of your renters are paying more than 35% of their income for rent. Nearly 50%. So that's a significant finding there that impacts, only 20% of your residents or your households are renting, but among those people, they're paying a lot in rent for their incomes. You can see here just the COVID impacts on the housing market. This is 2019 sales by month, and this is 2020 sales. So this is not local, this is a national issue. I mean, this is the Memphis Metro, by the way. So that's a metropolitan-wide statistic. Okay, and with that, not to leave you with a downer, because we will be looking at a lot of positive things as we move forward, and I'm very excited to be here. And I'll let Phil continue with the general development plan we did in 2017.
Just a few more slides before we get into the discussion. So Randy always has an amazing ability to make boring numbers kind of interesting. All right, so I just want to talk about plans and policies. That's something else we're looking at. I mentioned before, your current comprehensive plan, which is called the General Development Plan, is now 13 years old. So it was done in-house. It's a good plan, but it's like plans are like a loaf of bread. With time, they get stale and become less and less, relevant. So that's why we're obviously doing a new plan. A big part of that, though, was the land use plan as part of that 2007 comprehensive plan. And if you notice, if you look at this map, it's actually an area larger than the town boundaries. It's hard to tell here that the boundaries are this dashed line. It's kind of irregular, but it goes out to a bigger area, and it's kind of similar to your zoning. It looks at different land use classifications. One thing, though, that we're going to be doing differently, and it's not a reflection on this plan, it's just how the planning field has sort of evolved over the last 10 or 15 years, and that is, instead of having what we call a land use plan, we're going to have what's called a place types plan. And the reason is because land use just looks at land use. And so you might have a category that says commercial mixed use, which is your downtown, but the same category might apply to a suburban commercial area like out on Commerce near the interstate. And those are very different. So a place type looks not only at land use, but it also looks at development form and character, how buildings relate to the street, where the parking is, and all that kind of stuff. So the good news about the place type map is that when we describe each place type, it's really easy to then translate into zoning when you want to implement your plan. So that's one thing that will be different. Of course, Vince's company just did this bicycle and pedestrian master plan. That's your most recent, plan related to what we're doing. And this is just kind of an outline of what all's in the plan. And I know Vince can give us a big presentation on it, but we'll spare you because I know you already heard it before. But this is a map out of that plan, and it shows things like existing bike lanes, existing multi-use paths, existing crossings, trailheads, and then all the proposed ones. So what we're going to do, we don't have to totally rethink this topic for our plan. We're going to take what was just done and integrate it into our comprehensive plan. With zoning and codes, not surprisingly, your zoning map, your current zoning map, reflects to a great degree your 2007 plan. So that's something that we'll kind of rethink all of that stuff. Historic districts. When people mention to me, "Oh, we got a historic district," I always find that a lot of people don't understand the difference between a National Register historic district and a local historic district. It's interesting because in your all's case, all 5 of your national register districts are local districts. A lot of times there's a deviation. And the difference is that if you're a national register district, there are state and federal investment tax credits available if you take an old building and you rehabilitate it. You know, you rehab it, you follow federal preservation standards. So that's great, but there aren't any protections offered with national register designation. And that's where your local district kicks in, and you've got a preservation commission, an ordinance, and design guidelines, and that's all good news. You're also a CLG, certified local government, and that's your state preservation office, archives and history, and it basically recognizes that you've got a full-fledged preservation program. Because of that, there's a pool of grant money available for preservation projects for CLG communities, so that's a good thing. Here's just a list of some of your key entities. Governmental, obviously the city and all the bodies that relate most directly to this project, the county, regional agencies, including the NPO that Vince was talking about before. Then you've got all sorts of private and quasi-public entities, economic development, historic preservation related, and environmental. So that is our kind of background presentation. So whatever time we have left, I want to just have a discussion and talk about 2 things. And what I'd like to do now is get your opinion, and I think Keith's going to be our scribe here. And
If I turn on this light.
oh yeah, you turn on that one. So what are your opinions on, when you look at Hernando, what do you think the challenges are for us doing this plan that's going to take you where you want to go, and what are the opportunities? Yes, sir.
Traffic and stormwater drainage.
Traffic and stormwater drainage are challenges. Okay. Yes, sir.
To keep us from turning into town just like South Haven, Olive Branch, and Horn Lake.
Okay, you know, that's kind of interesting because what you just said is the converse of the next slide, which is what are the model communities? You just gave us the ones to avoid being like, right? What are the aspects of those towns? Because I'm not as familiar. We'll probably get out to
Starter homes.
Starter homes. And you're saying what? Too many starter homes, or
yeah?
Okay. So you
property value.
Yeah, you'd rather see housing.
Property value.
Yeah. Okay. And is that the case?
Want everybody to continue want to move to Hernando.
Sure.
All the stars are aligned. We got a perfect town.
Yep.
We want to keep it that way.
Okay.
Bye.
And is that the main downfall, in your opinion, of those other communities? Are there other aspects of it? Okay.
Well, it's not, we don't want to be Memphis. We want to grow and grow, but not turn into.
And the good thing is you're in a great place, and Randy might have talked about this stuff, but you have your own identity. You've got a great history, you've got a great downtown, you've got a community identity. So you want to reinforce that and make sure that it gets diluted, right? With development that's kind of generic and so forth. Okay. What are some other
strong sense of place that people want to?
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as that strong sense of place, can you rattle off some aspects of it, you or anybody else, that makes it a strong sense of place? Is it the downtown? Is it some undeveloped kind of pastoral landscapes? Or what are the things that to you give it its identity?
We're quaint.
Quaint.
We're a quaint town at this point.
Yeah.
Of all the cities in Suffolk County, I think we have the best city. The quaint town, the older town, not so, we're growing, of course.
Right.
I mean, I own a retail business, so I want us to grow.
Yeah.
But, we don't want to be so commercial that we lose sight, of what is so unique about us.
Yeah, and you think it's more of the type of commercial? In other words, if you came in with a whole bunch of chains and franchises that you could find anywhere, generica, as they call it, is that the kind of thing that would dilute it versus it's okay to have a new commercial, but make it more unique or something that fits your character? Is that?
I feel that way.
You're thinking? I see a bunch of heads nodding. So. Okay.
We have historic architecture here that South Haven does not have that because it's a very new city. Same, Horn Lake just doesn't have it. Olive Branch has a little bit of it around the square.
Okay. Historic architecture. What do you think? And I showed you that map that shows the 5 historic districts, and they include the square, and then the other 4 are real close to to the square area. Are there other, should we be paying attention to other, maybe historic properties that are further out, maybe old farmhouses, or what do you think?
Not necessarily further out, there's some inside the city that are just not in historic districts, and I've never understood why
Okay.
that was.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing we could recommend, and I do a lot of preservation work, so I can probably go out and identify the ones that look like they might have potential, and then maybe you do historic site surveys in those areas to determine could they become districts. Do you think most people would embrace the idea of expanding your historic districts, or do you think you get much pushback from property owners because of the regulations that come with those, or? And I'm not saying not to do it, I'm just curious as to what the temperature is.
I'm not sure how much you can expand it. Because before Interstate 55, there was absolutely nothing there. North, south, east, or west of Hernando except farming. And when you were talking about farmhouses, I can't even think of any out in those areas that even exist anymore.
Okay.
Except for the newer homes. So I'm not sure how much you could expand it and start. You know, a town that started that has 500 people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like there's a big population, you know, in the 1840s or 50s or 60s. So.
Up to 20, 25 years ago, went from 2,000.
Yeah, and of course you lost in the 1860s, a lot of downtown buildings burned. So, I mean, they didn't rebuild, obviously, but, yeah, lost your earliest stuff. Yes, sir.
Is there a possible way to maintain a historical character of Hernando with residential and commercial new construction that doesn't necessarily mean it's historical, but it has that character look and feel?
Yeah.
Because if you look at a lot of those, you mentioned the 2000 to 2009 development of new homes.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at those new homes, they all look like the same architect firm designed every one of those houses and homes. They're all unique in their own way, but
Yeah.
Each subdivision, well, that looks the same. That subdivision looks the same.
And I know right now you've got design guidelines. I think, is that mainly for commercial development?
I don't know. Commercial and industrial.
Yeah. What you could, you know, one thing that I noticed in driving through the newest subdivisions, you know, a lot of communities require that you have street trees. In other words, you know, you got the road edge here, you've got a green, I don't know, this planter strip, and then you got a sidewalk. And usually between the sidewalk and that curb, you know, in the planting strip, you would require at least a couple of street trees along the front of the lot. It makes a huge difference. When you go into a neighborhood and look at it, and it's a tree-lined street, it doesn't have to cost a lot more money, but it visually, and it's good for the environment, more trees, you know, filters air pollution and things like that. So a lot of reasons. Property value is higher when you have trees. I mean, they've done all sorts of studies that have found that. So that's one. I mean, we could look at architecture too. The other thing is when you get houses that where the garage, it's a front-loaded garage and it kind of dominates the street, you know, garage state they call it. There are things you can do with design guidelines that can minimize a visual impact of garages, either by like kind of setting them back, where they're set back a few feet from the plane of the facade or things like that. So I mean, between street trees and having regulations that might address garages, that could go a pretty long way.
I think architectural standards, I think that's really what people are wanting.
Mm-hmm.
Different areas, maybe we could have different architectural guidelines.
Yeah.
Because it's really old town, it's old Mississippi, and more traditional homes, more homes that kind of remind you of your childhood, you know?
Yep.
Not the living, but the big things, yeah.
Yeah, very good. Yes, sir.
I'm going to piggyback and agree with the aspects about higher home values, with the exception of if we want our kids to live here after they come out of college, they're not going to have the income levels to be able to afford anything but a starter home. So that you've got to have the type of starter home that can fit economically for younger adults, and that includes apartments. And if I've understood the statistic correctly, we don't have enough apartments in order to match the.
I haven't done a market study on that. My understanding from just looking at the numbers is that the rents, you know, in terms of supply and demand, it's relatively high. and therefore people are paying more of their income in rent. I
Right.
don't know whether there's
Yeah.
enough or not, that's a
Yeah.
question.
The other caveat I'd also add is, I mean, look who's not in the room. And so, I mean, I'll just say for starter homes and demographics, there's another piece of the community that we ought to hear from.
Yeah, and more in communities, and I'll get to you all in just a second, more and more though I hear a lot of places I work where they say, gosh, you know, the A word, apartments, ooh, you gotta tiptoe around that, right? Because,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of times, public doesn't want to hear that. At the same time, you've got people who say, I'd like my kids to be able to come back here.
Yeah.
But they gotta have somewhere to live. How about teachers? How about police officers? You know, people, firefighters, you know, people who need more affordable housing.
I will say that what I'm seeing nationally, and you'll see in this region too, that there's a barbell effect in the market. So you have the baby boomers who are going to be aging, or are aging into empty nester housing, smaller yards. They don't want a big lot anymore. A lot of them, not everyone, but a lot of people want a smaller home, less maintenance. And that model also works well with younger families that are just, you know, because they're not as expensive. And
Yeah.
so if you can meet those two markets at once, it really is a way to hit that market.
I may be pretty frank, and I totally disagree with him. I don't know him, but I've been around here a little while, and I've seen too many communities get destroyed, by upper scale apartments. And,
When you say
I just don't think-
upscale, now how would you describe it? Do you mean?
they start out upscale.
Ah.
My wife got out of school, she lived at, Wood Lake Apartments on Winchester, now you need a machine gun to get to it.
Right.
And, I just, and people may not agree with me in there, but I just disagree with that.
I agree with you, Sam. I think it's a problem that we get into. This Horn Lake can never be anything but what it is because they have inexpensive housing there. When you have inexpensive housing and apartments, that's where all your social services dollars go. The police, the fire department, everything that goes to service lower income people. And I know that the popular idea is you need to have, you know, affordable housing in each community. I just don't agree with that. I don't think you do.
Tim, you just compared, I couldn't follow y'all because you were talking about Hernando and then DeSoto County.
Uh-huh.
So if you're gonna use DeSoto County, you do have affordable housing.
Right.
But yeah,
Within driving distance of wherever you wanna go. So that market has been taken care of, it just doesn't have to take care of it in Hernando.
Yeah, and by the way, we don't come in here with preconceived notions on, you gotta do this. I mean, this is why we're having this discussion, so we can hear and get direction, and figure out what's the best approach. One thing, there was a hand
Yeah, I was
raised.
gonna say, I mean, Hernando has a lot of nicer, larger homes that like older people will have more affordability in buying. We don't have a lot of townhomes, we don't have a lot of apartments that are in fact like our demographic. So as all of us are looking at buying houses, we don't see a market that we can afford. And I do think that is something we want in Hernando, because you don't want it just to be all very well established people, you want people who are starting to establish themselves as well. And people want to live here, and the reason rents are so high for rental homes is because people want their kids to go to school here, but they can't afford to buy a house here. So they pay a lot more for rental property.
And by the way, you know, there are a lot of reasons why some people object to apartments, but one of them is oftentimes the look. You know, they don't like the look of an apartment, but I mean, we've all seen beautifully designed apartments, you know, with the right architecture, the right landscaping. You know, you can raise the quality of it.
What happens to them in 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, you gotta maintain
I
it.
mean, you can go look at Whitehaven and see that.
I think,
That's not a good argument.
but I'm hearing the conversation, two different conversations. One is about starter homes and purchasing housing for young families, for example, young people working or for people moving down in the market. And another discussion is about multifamily housing. So I think you need to keep those separate in your mind.
Yeah.
I think they're two separate conversations that I'm hearing. I mean, maybe,
Yeah.
so you think we don't need anything that is affordable in terms of for sale housing either?
You have it.
We do have
You have
it.
it in
they should
DeSoto
get
County.
here.
You have it in DeSoto County.
We have it in Hernando. We
When they make
have
enough money, they can
subdivisions
move here.
that are affordable in Hernando.
It won't take long to make money. I mean, 10 years.
Yes, ma'am.
I think at the end of the whole conversation, we're not opposed to young people having to start home. I've got kids too, so I agree with you. What we are seeing happen in other communities, whether it's in Sutton County, Memphis, and what we've seen it's happening here, is the young couples that come in, buy that starter home, that's not the issue. Some of those young couples have now got better jobs, they're making more money, they're gonna upscale to a house, and then they rent that house out. And there's a lot of that,
And that's problematic because of maybe the types of folks who are renting.
It is, and it's not to discriminate against anybody that's renting a house, but over time, you get great families that do that, but then you also start losing the value, the upkeeps of the house, you start losing, and you see these starter homes turn into just not very good neighborhoods, when it really could be. I don't know how to fix that problem,
You can regulate.
There's no proper
against
maintenance, there's no, guidelines for those starter home communities, and maybe that's something to put in place, for these areas, whether it's an HOA or whatever it is, into these areas, to where they have to maintain that. And then we can have the best of both worlds a little bit. We can provide for the young people that are gonna follow us. We want them here, but we also want that property maintained.
Yeah.
It's gonna keep our values up as well.
And Randy, when you're talking about saying you can have regulations that preclude rental within homeowners associations? 'Cause-
Sure.
Yeah. As opposed to city regulations that would.
Right, a homeowners association, if you were.
Just something, that's gonna help those starter areas maintain the quality.
But
that they
HOAs
provide.
have to regulate themselves. City doesn't have an authority to exercise what's in an HOA.
And the problem with the HOA argument is those things are generally set up by the developers. The developers don't care about that. All the developers want to do is sell that house. And I think part of the problem that we see now is that local government does not hold developers' feet to the fire in making sure that they do what they promise they're going to do, and not letting them say we're building this and then going and building something else.
Okay. So housing's a big issue, so.
It is the issue.
Yeah, because we spend a lot of time. I mean, that's
Lot
good.
size and houses is the issue.
Lot sizes, as in, one or
Well,
two.
when a developer comes in, what he wants to do is put 5 houses on 1 acre. Why? He make more money.
Sure.
He gives the same argument I heard over here, national trend, people getting older, people getting younger, whatever. They all want a small lot. Well, if you go down to Destin, people want no lot. That's the demand down there. They don't want anything. They just want a condo.
Sure.
So that's not a good argument. But when you start putting 4 or 5 houses on 1 acre, it starts looking like these other towns we're talking about. And they say they're gonna build a real nice house and they're gonna do this and that. But all of a sudden, it looks like just a whole bunch of houses stuck together. It doesn't look like Hernando. It's not keeping Hernando.
People are searching for lots of trees.
Yeah,
You know,
and the other thing is, all the stars aligned. We could get Intel here, we could get 3M, we could get IBM. All we gotta do is go ask. You could get so many big corporations down here, they would fight each other to come down and say, you about it. But when they come down, they're gonna have to have an area of town where they can build mansions. They're not gonna want, hey, I wanna build a real nice house on 3/4 of an acre. They're gonna want 5 acres, 6 acres.
Yeah.
One section of Hernando needs to be set aside for massive lots.
Yeah, and typically when you do a plan like ours, what you're trying to do is provide variety. Like some areas would be larger lots and some might be smaller lots. Okay, and I think I saw, yes, sir.
Yeah, we're gonna shift, if we can shift the conversation back to traffic, road networks.
Yep.
You had mentioned, I can't remember Joan's name,
Yes.
the plan to widen 55 down to Star Landing and then back on down to Commerce in the future. The monumental task of doing something with Commerce, East Commerce. But if you study that road net, we're getting so congested. Hernando West, as you mentioned, just is in the process of being developed. Weatherby West just got approved last night. There's several other subdivisions being in the process of being developed. And what's happening is, and you mentioned all the traffic numbers of the road networks, the average cars per transport, I can't remember the acronym, ADT or something. But when you get to that town center, where the farmer's market is, where our fairs are at, where our festivals are at, what makes the character Hernando, you're getting to the point where you can't get into downtown anymore. And you're getting log jammed at the railroad tracks, you're getting log jammed at 51 there at the corner of 51 and Commerce. How are we going to address getting from the west side of town to the east side of town without going through the center of town? How do we manage people that need to go from Rising Sun subdivision out on 2-lane and make a trip to Walmart and back, and there's only one way to go, and it's right through the center. And if they're trying to do that in any peak traffic time, it takes you 45 minutes to get from one side of town to the other.
Yeah, well, one of the components of our plan is going to be a transportation plan. And when I think of commerce, for example, from the interstate to downtown, I mean, there are a lot of things to look at. One is how traffic flows. And I mean, can you do things to expand, not to create a highway, but at the same time, it's also a tremendous development opportunity. And there's a strong sense of character. It's a gateway. It is flat out a gateway. It's maybe your number one, entrance into the community. So you sure don't want to mess up the character of it. And so it's tricky. I think a lot of attention, this plan needs to pay a lot of attention to that corridor, though, but not just from a mobility perspective, but also the development and the character along it.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? I'm just asking because I don't understand, but how's the priority on things like that? Because we build communities and we raise the population, and then the schools get overcrowded, but we don't build a school until we get overcrowded, and then we go build another school. Is that the same way we look at roads? We build up communities to the point where we're so congested, now we have to go look at roads? Or is there a plan in this plan, or is there a way we say, okay, we're not gonna build any more communities until we address the road network, and then we'll expand the businesses? Or is there a mix between we're gonna expand commercial and residential at the same time, and then we're gonna do roads? I mean, what's the plan in terms of priority, how we approach that?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the transportation piece of a comprehensive plan, I mean, sometimes there are remedial things that have to occur. In other words, going back and looking at a road that doesn't work real well now and figuring out how do you retrofit it for now and for the future. So I don't know if it's sort of a chicken and egg thing, but we obviously have to address it and figure it out.
I mean, I think, I just want to add to that. I think it's a bit of both. And Vince, you correct me if I'm wrong. You're the expert in this field, but I've been doing this for a long time, and in most instances, we see transportation improvements following land use decisions that are made. But that's not always the case. Sometimes communities target a particular area for some type of development or road, and they may build a road to help facilitate that. So I think it's both, but I would say that more often than not, you're reacting as a community, but you're trying to plan ahead, right? Would you agree with that? I would agree.
And the only reason I singled out that corridor so much is because it's your first and last impression of Hernando for a lot of people, right? Think about it. So I just think a lot of focus needs to go on that stretch of road.
Let me ask you on commerce, how do you expand it?
Yeah,
without taking our businesses out?
This is our first day here. So we don't have any answers yet.
How do you cross the railroad and expand it without wiping us all out that have businesses on commerce?
Well, we don't want to turn it into a highway, that's for sure. And it may be more of relieving some traffic with other routes. Not like you want to kill them. Yeah, it may be that, but we don't have the answers yet. We're mainly here to introduce the project.
One thing, you're right, you have to find some alternate east-west corridor to take off that without expanding that and changing the character to the gateway we're talking about. But there's other ways that you can look at possibly, with maybe multimodal along that corridor. Maybe give them some, like we've been doing, looking at bike ped stuff that would give local traffic, a better opportunity to get to the square from, other side of the interstate or whatever. But there's things you can do like that would help minimize automobile traffic on that, but not to a great extent without changing the geometry.
So you got the railroads challenge.
Yes, yes.
Who controls the street lights? Is that county or is that city?
I have no idea.
Good dog.
Who controls this?
Street
Not
lights.
all of them.
Like the one around the court, like the one around the courthouse.
Well, the city.
The one that's so messed up.
I want it only comes out about 14 seconds.
Well, that's a current issue, which I know that's, you're not at that level yet, but around the courthouse,
Uh-huh.
the light that's on the south side of the courthouse is off. My business was on the south side of the courthouse. I moved my business, because people, the court days, Mondays and Tuesdays, I think, or whatever court days are, everybody takes them to parking, there's no space for retail, there's no retail parking, there's none of that. Business stuff on Mondays and Tuesdays, right? Another retail went in the same location when I came out of it, same situation, she's come out of it.
Yeah.
That street light, you know, the flow of traffic needs to be adjusted. You know, when y'all are looking at doing all this expanding, to make those lights, you know, go back and forth, because we do have such a small area, like he was saying, there's nowhere to really expand.
Yeah.
But we've got to figure out, we got to fix that flow.
So I haven't had a chance to really study your downtown much so far, but parking's a challenge, I think, at like non-street parking. Is it managed? Are there time limits? And I'm not suggesting you bring in parking meters, but they're not enforced. That, you know, typically what we find in a lot of downtowns is that's the case, that time limits are enforced, and you have employees parking on street in spaces that should be reserved for customers. It's like you're cutting your own neck when you are an employee, business owner downtown, and you park on street. That should always be reserved for people that, you know, spend money, diners, shoppers, and so forth. And employees need to be parking on side streets, behind, you know, where you have, and I realize you may have a strain with available parking, but that's something we can look at and try to figure out. But that, you know, regulating parking is really important if you want to keep your businesses, you know, vibrant.
But when it takes you 10 minutes to find a place or longer, and
Yeah.
we need to get out of that
And
place.
you don't want to give a person an excuse not to come downtown because of parking. Yes, ma'am.
I think, I mean, if we're looking at the future, we definitely need a parking garage of some sort, or a dedicated parking area to access downtown, and then alongside that, more sidewalks, so people can park, you know, quarter mile away if needed, and walk down and enjoy the nightlife, what little we have.
And you need good street lighting,
Yeah.
especially, you know, the winter time or whatever, so people feel safe when they're going, you know, from a business on the square to a parking lot that might be a block or two away. Yep. Any other before, okay.
Back to the signal thing, I do think that, the signal optimization plan, you know, all the signals combined, a study to see that, I mean, you could probably get some pretty good benefits.
They just changed those lights, within the last 3 or 4 months. And they went in and reconfigured them and they screwed them up.
So is it the timing?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. If you're coming up Union Street to 51, that light is 3 seconds long. And the traffic that's coming west on Commerce Street is backing up all the way to Funderburg's. The traffic that is coming north on 51 is backing up all the way to Oak Grove. And it's because the timing, they came back in and changed that timing and made it worse.
Okay.
So I also think that the parks and open spaces is a huge, place where we could add a lot more value than we have right now. It's kind of subpar.
And do you think you need more, like active recreational parks or more passive parks for just like hiking and picnicking, or what type of parks?
Both,
What is an active park?
like.
Like organized sports,
Oh, I see.
recreational facilities like, you know, courts, playing fields, that kind of stuff.
Both,
Both,
but probably recreational
yeah,
sports and stuff.
Does the city have a recreation
like department.
or
Yes.
recreation
Yeah, there's a couple of
facility?
Yeah, there's a parks department.
Okay, because one thing we're gonna wanna do is get an inventory of all the parks, like figure out where they are, what facilities they have. You know, you can look at, there are national standards, like per capita, you need this many tennis courts, and that's kind of a broad rule of thumb, and then you kind of look at the specific community and think, what do they do?
Well, the reason I brought that up is in terms of maintaining that high quality, the high standard of, you know, as a residential community, a lot of affluent communities have built very high-end recreation facilities for their residents, you know, that are used only for residents, and they're a real amenity value that people the corporate sector, when they move to look at a community, that's one of the things they're definitely looking at.
Is there YMCA?
Oliver, most of our park improvements over the past few years have been driven by citizens and private donations and not by the city.
Yeah. Okay.
Quick suggestion, when you present this on your history, I'd make the history a lot bigger and a lot more important. People really like the history part. And add in the Great Flood where we lost State County.
Okay, what year was that?
37, I think. Before my time.
You mean when we separated?
Yeah.
That was 1872.
1870s, 80s.
Oh, was it that long ago? I thought it was during the Great Flood.
No.
Okay. Oops.
Before I go on to the second question about model communities, are there any other things you want to talk about that are challenges or opportunities? I mean, we've hit on a lot of things. So.
Probably, well, utilities,
Utilities.
water, sewer.
Is that a challenge to expand, are you thinking? Okay.
A lot of opportunity, get all of our wires underground. It's 2020.
Yeah.
They don't need poles sticking up all over.
Keith, are there requirements now for new development to go underground?
All new development is required to go underground.
So you're talking remedial work.
That's in the city
If you
limits.
do an infill in an area where there is existing overhead, we allow that to stay.
Yeah.
Because it's the infill.
Right. Okay. Well, we can look at
Just
not
like
require-
downtown, you go downtown in
Yes.
East Commerce,
Yeah.
it's a stark difference driving those roads and when you start getting out of downtown where everything's underground.
And that would have to be a city initiative to do. Picking strategically certain places to start with. Okay.
Here's the biggest challenge I've seen is that, tax base. This tax base is not growing enough to, do all the things we want to do in the room. So it's, when you don't have but a 3 or 4% increase in sales tax and about that in your overall property tax, the other expenses kind of eat it up.
Right.
So,
And that's why we're doing specifically the retail market analysis.
Oh, with COVID.
Okay.
And so our schools also, I know that that's run by the county school system, so that's a little bit of an issue, but if we could somehow, get with them and kind of include, we're gonna have to expand our schools at some point. Well, they've already added on to some of them, but, that's.
Yeah, and they usually do their own planning, but it doesn't mean we can't at least coordinate with them, find out, what they've got planned. They'll share that with us and be able to somehow incorporate it into the plan. Yes, ma'am.
In the next meeting, we also take a look at the already current budget, or if there's any projected budgets for next, 2021 even, so we can kind of see where the current dollars are going.
Well, that would be
I know, but
available.
if we're talking about it in the context of the meeting, that people can kind of reference, so we know.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing we look at more, when we do the implementation chapter of the plan, that's when you really start looking more at dollars and kind of, that information is public and available, so.
And I could put in a brief summary of the existing fiscal situation.
Yeah, I just think that'd be helpful, but I'm sure not everybody
Yeah.
can look online.
Sure. Let me switch gears for those who can stay for one more question or topic, and that is, again, I'm not suggesting that we want Hernando to become another place and become this community or that, but you've all been places, maybe lived places, visited, where there might be some aspect of a community, and you're like, hey, that's kind of cool, maybe we can adapt that to Hernando. What are those kind of places that come to mind for you?
Well, we have a subdivision, that was started being developed out of, Franklin, Tennessee. Developer started, things kind of went back.
Is that the west?
Montclair. It's down off of, Oak Grove.
Okay,
That was being modeled after Franklin, Tennessee.
Okay.
Great, cool community,
Mhm.
and then that's kind of changed, just tweaked a little bit. I haven't been in the right routine of the house for a while, but I'm from South Haven. And we moved to Hernando 21 years ago, and we chose Hernando over the other cities. I think it was more like the Oxford of DeSoto County,
Yeah.
kind of deal.
sure.
So that's not, Oxford's pretty busy because it's a college town, of course, but still, it's a cool looking town.
Sure.
You know, and I think that's a draw, like we said earlier.
So there are aspects of Oxford and Franklin, Tennessee that are appealing, and probably get their character and history and that kind of thing.
Uniqueness.
Yeah.
And
Yes, sir.
I think what can bring Oxford is a lot of people talk about their square and trying to not mimic it, but kind of transition towards that. But we're handcuffed because of all the administrative functions that go on that square. We've got a business on the square, and it's a Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and after that, you know, they take up all the parking. And I feel, I mean, you might not be able to back out of the parking space for 20 minutes, like legit. And that handcuffs us having all of those city government jobs there, because you're not going to be able to get those retail spaces in there. And that's the prime location.
Yeah, one thing we found in a lot of communities is that like the footprint of the downtown simply needs to expand, right? Because you're kind of hemmed in to the extent that you can do that without tearing down a bunch of good historic buildings. But sometimes that's the case, right?
And to add on to that, one of the things I noticed about your square is that unlike a lot of southern squares, a lot of your buildings are one story.
Yeah.
Which I found interesting, yeah. And that also causes a constraint because the law firms, whatever, could be in the upper floors of buildings rather than taking up the ground floor. But you have a lot of ground floor office suites.
And it's tricky because it is a historic district, right? So it's not like you're going to be tearing down a bunch of buildings and put up 3-story buildings. But there might be on the periphery.
Or there could be the opportunity on some buildings to add another floor, not necessarily historic buildings, but there are some buildings that are not historic where maybe that's not.
Yeah, there are some because they've already been altered quite a bit. Maybe you could.
Well,
yes, sir.
In your studies, is there anything that you can offer as far as the amount of like businesses being concentrated in one area instead of spread out a little bit more? You know?
So kind of like sub-districts that kind of focus on one home furnishings, you mean like in this area?
Well, with free enterprise, it's hard to control what type of businesses. We want to make sure that they're good, but you know, I'm gonna throw I'll be that guy, you know, Mexican restaurants.
Yeah.
You know, you got 3 sitting right there by each other for the most part. And, you know, and liquor stores, banks. I mean, I work for one. They're really concentrated. That you can just pretty much walk to them, you know.
Now, are you saying that's a good thing, or are you saying you'd rather see them spread out?
I'd rather see them spread out.
Okay.
You know, if you wanted to go to that one, you could cross town.
See, Robert, I kind of disagree from a retail standpoint. I would love, we're a restaurant, I would love to have restaurants all the way around the square.
I'm not saying restaurant, I'm saying like restaurants. Like, you don't want everybody.
You don't want to say that.
Correct, but I mean, there's a reason they put a Walgreens and a CVS next to each other, or a McDonald's and a Burger King. They become more successful.
That's the sort of thing that you can't usually regulate. Now, your Main Street program, you know, typically they'll have a kind of a strategy on what tenant mix they're trying to achieve. And that's why sometimes, it's usually larger downtowns where you kind of get these sub-districts that specialize, like the dining district here, and entertainment, you know, whatever. So that wouldn't work.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of small towns that have antiques as their main retail in the downtown. But I think usually it's the other way around. People are trying to encourage more things that are similar to be around each other because that creates a destination.
Right,
so
rather than spread them
maybe
out.
not so much with banks, but with other types of retail where people go, oh, that's a place to go to boutiques because there's so many women's boutiques all in the same place.
Well, everybody go to a bunch of boutiques. I said that wrong. But everybody wants to go to different shops.
Yeah.
But we don't want to eat, we want other places to eat besides the basic restaurant.
Yeah.
You know,
That's a question of
we want other
diversity.
diverse things, you know, we have steakhouse, we have one of this, and then we'll have none.
And that's
You
something
can't
I'm
get
just
any-
saying
you
all
can't
the
get any-
suggestions of maybe how, because we truly can't control that, you know, in free enterprise, but just some suggestions on how we might be more offering to say, hey, you might be better off here as opposed to here. Why don't you look in this area?
Well, maybe as part of the retail analysis.
Yeah, I'll be
since
looking
that covers dining, we can address.
I'll be looking at how to diversify the mix.
Yeah, one thing that's going to happen in the near future that is going to affect the square is it is inevitable that the county is going to have to build another courthouse, which will probably wind up being, if they're smart, part of a criminal justice center over by where the new jail is. When that happens, they would have the opportunity to turn the the courthouse into something like a museum, the lawyers that are located around the square would necessarily move out to where those the other courthouses are. And then you're gonna have nothing but, yeah. Because right now you've got a lot of things around the square that are not shops. They are.
Governmental.
Yes, they're governmental lawyers and insurance
And
companies.
that's a tricky issue, because, I mean, I'll give you a great example. In fact, Randy and I both worked in Clarksville, Tennessee. And at some point, 10, 20 years ago, they pulled out a lot of their county offices out of downtown, and it really hurt them, their downtown. I mean, you gotta remember, those are employees that go out and sometimes they'll eat or maybe even shop or whatever. And so you gotta be really careful on making changes, especially local government offices going somewhere else and losing all those employees that were also supporting your downtown. So, I mean, we can look at that, but it's
We looked
something.
at Lauderdale County, Mississippi.
Oh, we did, yeah, in Meridian, yeah, we looked at, and it was the same thing, the county government in downtown Meridian was scattered all over. So we looked at one, I guess a couple different scenarios. One was like keeping their resources downtown. Another was taking this abandoned suburban shopping mall from the 70s and moving out there. And in that case, and it's not Hernando, but in the case of Meridian, we determined it probably made more sense, especially to help their downtown, to stay downtown and just, continue to be in that area. But
I will say that the county, the new administrative building, I don't know how new it is, but the one that was built on the corner there is one of the best I've seen nationally. I mean, the way that they designed it, it's not, it doesn't take up a lot of commercial space right on the square, but it's right facing on the square, and all those employees are right there. I think they did a great job with that. And so it may not be that those
are not going anywhere. The administration building is going to stay there. We don't need a connection between the administration building and the court by and large.
okay.
The courts can be in another.
And we just need to understand the different operations of the different
Yeah,
departments.
in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, they just built a new courthouse in the downtown that's not on the square, but it's still downtown. So that was a way of satisfying both of those issues. They moved off the square. So
Franklin did the same thing.
Yeah.
Like 15 years ago. By the way, I haven't been to Collierville in a long time, but I worked on a project where they wanted to move City Hall. It was an old church. Wasn't the greatest building for City Hall, but they wanted to move it out to the suburbs, and we did a study to see what kind of impact it would be on downtown. I remember our findings were that it would negatively impact downtown, but I don't think severely. I can't remember. But what I'm wondering is they have since moved, and that was probably a good 10, 15 years ago. Do y'all know, does anybody go to Collierville much to their downtown and know how it's been doing?
It's just shopping.
It's thriving.
It's doing well?
Yeah.
Okay, so in that case, that's an example where they moved the government office out, and I guess it didn't really hurt.
A lot of people come here. Since 269 opened up,
Uh-huh.
we definitely have been talking and having conversations. We get a lot of people from Collierville that come to Hernando. They come to our farmer's market, they come to our retail shops. Because used to, when you lived in Mississippi, they thought you lived way far away. Well, now, we're 15 minutes. We're 269, so we're getting that.
And there's a difference in the sales tax rate. So we do get people that come from across the state line. Our sales tax is 7, and there's at least 9.25.
Right. So before we forget about, and we probably need to wrap up because I know people have, what's your comment or question?
I thought Starkville, Mississippi was a really good example of.
Starkville? Okay.
They have an expanded downtown that starts on 20th Street.
Yeah.
So it starts on the end and goes all the way down multiple blocks, and there's like tributaries that really function well. And that whole local small businesses that people can come and.
Yeah. And several of us worked on their comprehensive plan about 5 or so years ago. And I remember when I was amazed, they were at about 100% occupancy for their downtown. I don't know if they still are, but they were. And that was an example where we said they needed to grow, and that the footprint needed to go north to 182, which is also MLK, I think, and kind of grow in that direction for their downtown. So
I should say that when you start comparing college towns to us,
yeah,
you know the tax base and you know the price of housing. I think Oxford gets $800,000 or $900,000 a month, maybe close to $1 million in sales tax. It's difficult to compare the two communities from a tax base.
Right. Any other places you can think of, though, that you like something about the community and that maybe we could adapt it here?
Ocean Springs.
Ocean Springs?
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Gotta bring a beach, right?
There's really not much of a beach there.
Oh, okay.
But the community, it's,
You
I
just
mean,
have to see
they have
it.
all the old trees and all those
Yeah.
stores, it's a walking strip, and it brings events, and it's a cool little town as well.
Any other comments? Listen, I appreciate your all's input. This has been great. I can't believe we kept you here this long, which I apologize, but I appreciate it because it's really helpful for us, especially starting out. And we haven't picked the next date. We'll be back when we do all of our stakeholder meetings and you do your work. Then the next thing, instead of me just saying it, last slide. This is kind of reminding me. So the next thing we'll be doing is the visioning and economic assessment and Randy's retail market analysis, and then we'll make a big to-do out of the charrette, because we want to get as many people out and engaged and kind of a hands-on process to come up with the main ideas for the plan. So anyway, with that said, thank you for being here, and I appreciate it.
Sorry.
Oh, you're fine.